paper crackles like burning wood. Federal Archive, Freiburg, File 8293, R, Classification Level 15. Sealed until 1995. Inside, for pages of Gothic script, each word carved deep enough to tear the paper. The ink has faded to brown, like dried blood, like ash mixed with rain. At the top, a date, October 15th, 1943. Below it, a sentence that burns itself into memory. I set their houses on fire and felt the taste of ash on my lips. These are the final words of Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, 3rd Mountain Division, Army Group South. Written in a farmhouse near Minsk, hours before he put his service pistol to his temple. Found hidden in the wall by his orderly, who carried this confession for 52 years before finally surrendering it to history. This is his testimony. This is his damnation. This is his final attempt to wash the taste of ash from a tongue that would never speak again. Don't let these forbidden voices be forgotten. Subscribe now so we can uncover more of what was buried. Friedrich Wilhelm Weber was born December 12, 1915, in the Bavarian village of Garmisch-Partenkirchen. His father, Klaus, had been a carpenter before the Great War, a man who built wooden churches that still stand today, their spires reaching toward a God who seemed closer then. His mother, Maria, taught children their catechism and grew herbs in a garden that smelled of rosemary and prayer. Friedrich was the youngest of 3 sons, the boy who carved wooden soldiers while his brothers played with real rifles. His hands were always busy, whittling figures from pine wood, sketching the mountains that surrounded their village, building miniature churches that his mother placed on windowsills like offerings. Father Klaus used to say Friedrich had gentle hands, hands blessed by God for creation rather than destruction. I obeyed, Friedrich wrote in his confession, the words surrounded by ink stains that looked like soot. When they gave the order, I obeyed. Not because I believed it was right, not because I hated the people whose homes I burned, but because obedience was easier than thinking, because following orders felt safer than making choices. The war came to Bavaria in 1939, but it felt distant then, like thunder from storms that threatened other villages. Friedrich was 24 when he was conscripted, old enough to understand what service meant but young enough to believe it would end quickly. He trained at Bad Reichenhall, learned to march in formation, read maps in darkness, command men who were barely more than boys themselves. Friedrich excelled at leadership not because he was cruel but because he was kind. His men trusted him, followed him, believed he would bring them home safely. They called him Father Friedrich because he remembered their names, wrote letters for those who could not write, shared his rations with soldiers whose families had stopped sending packages. The flames rose, Friedrich wrote, his handwriting growing smaller, more desperate, as if he could hide the enormity of his crime in tiny letters. Orange at first, then white-hot. I watched wooden walls collapse into glowing embers. I heard the sound walls make when they scream. I tasted ash on my tongue and swallowed it like communion. The order came on October 12, 1943, during Operation Autumn Harvest, the Wehrmacht's systematic destruction of villages suspected of harboring partisans. Friedrich's company was assigned to Sector 7, a cluster of farming settlements 30 kilometers east of Minsk. Intelligence reported weapon caches, safe houses, civilian support for resistance activities. The mission was simple: evacuate all inhabitants, search for contraband, destroy everything that could shelter enemies of the Reich. Standard scorched earth protocol. What the orders did not specify was that evacuation meant separation of families, that search meant interrogation under torture, that destroy meant burning people's entire lives to ash and memory. Friedrich received the orders from Colonel Brenner at 0600 hours. 12 villages, estimated 400 civilians, complete destruction authorized. No exceptions. No survivors who might rebuild, replant, remember. Children screamed. Friedrich wrote, the words barely legible through the tears that had smeared the ink 40 years before. Not from pain but from terror. They had never seen their homes burn before, had never watched their fathers disappear into trucks that drove toward trenches, had never learned that men like me could smile while setting fire to everything they loved. Friedrich's company approached the first village, Malinovo, at dawn. Mist rose from the river that ran between wooden houses, carrying the scent of breakfast fires and fresh bread. Children played in muddy streets while their mothers hung laundry on lines strung between trees. It was the kind of morning that made war seem impossible, peace seem natural. But peace was not the mission. Friedrich divided his men into 3 groups. 1 to round up civilians, 1 to search houses for contraband, 1 to prepare the burning. The operation proceeded with mechanical efficiency, each step planned and rehearsed until destruction became routine. The civilians were herded into the village square, told they were being relocated for their own safety. Most believed it. What else could they believe? The alternative was too terrible to acknowledge. Mothers packed blankets and cooking pots. Fathers tried to calm frightened children. Grandparents clutched photographs of relatives they would never see again. "I watched them pack," Friedrich wrote. "Watched them choose which possessions to save, which memories to abandon. They moved so carefully, so tenderly, selecting items they thought would matter in whatever place we were taking them. They didn't understand that we were taking them nowhere, that the packing was theater, the gentleness was cruelty." The search revealed what searches always revealed. Hunting rifles registered with local authorities, photographs of men who had joined the Red Army, letters from relatives in Moscow. No weapons caches, no resistance headquarters, no evidence of partisan activity beyond the simple act of existing while German forces needed reasons to destroy. But evidence was irrelevant. The decision to burn had been made before the search began, in offices far from Malinovo, by men who saw villages as grid coordinates and civilians as acceptable losses in a war of total destruction. Friedrich's company was not investigating crimes. They were committing them. "Ash clung to my tongue," Friedrich confessed, describing the moment he lit the first house. "Sweet at first, like bread in the oven, then bitter like burnt hair and melted plastic. Then something else. Something that tasted like souls leaving bodies, like childhood ending, like the last breath of a world I helped murder." The burning began at 14:30 hours. Friedrich personally ignited the house where the village teacher lived, a wooden structure filled with books, maps, children's drawings tacked to walls that would soon be cinders. He used a flamethrower, military issue, designed for clearing bunkers but perfectly adequate for destroying homes. The flame caught immediately. Pine wood seasoned by decades of harsh winters burned like paper, walls disappearing in minutes, roofs collapsing in showers of sparks that drifted across the village like snow made of fire. Friedrich watched the teacher's books burn, primers for learning Russian, arithmetic texts, stories about brave children and talking animals, and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not remorse, nothing. "They ordered. I obeyed," Friedrich wrote, returning again and again to the simple equation that had transformed him from carpenter's son to destroyer of homes. "I told myself it was necessary. Told myself these people supported terrorists, threatened German soldiers, deserved punishment. I told myself 1,000 lies because the truth, that I was burning homes because I lacked courage to refuse, was unbearable." House after house fell to Friedrich's flamethrower. The blacksmith's forge, where 3 generations had shaped metal into tools for building and growing. The midwife's cottage, where half the village had been born. The church, small and wooden, where Friedrich's own father might have prayed if he had been born in Belarus instead of Bavaria. The church burned brightest of all. Friedrich watched icons melt, their painted faces running like tears down charred wood. He watched the altar catch fire, the cross collapse into the flames, the bell tower fall with a crash that silenced every other sound in the village. When the bell struck the ground, it rang once, a final note that echoed across burning ruins like a funeral dirge for faith itself. But what Friedrich could not write, even in his final confession, was darker than the flames themselves. The truth that would have damned him completely, that he had enjoyed the burning. Not consciously, not proudly, but somewhere deep in his German soul, he had felt the primitive satisfaction of absolute power over other human beings. For 4 hours, Friedrich had been God. He decided which homes burned and which escaped. He chose the order of destruction, the pace of annihilation, the final moments of a world that had existed for centuries and would disappear forever in an afternoon. The intoxication of that power was more addictive than alcohol, more corrupting than ideology. "Forgive me if you can," Friedrich wrote, addressing words to victims who could no longer hear them, to God who might no longer listen, to his own conscience which had died with the first house he burned. "I know forgiveness is not mine to ask. I know I destroyed more than buildings. I destroyed trust, hope, the belief that neighbors will not murder neighbors for following orders." The civilians of Malinovo were loaded onto trucks at 1600 hours, told they were being transported to relocation camps where they would be safe, fed, reunited with family members from other villages. The trucks drove east, toward forests where pits had been dug in advance, where German efficiency had prepared mass graves with the same attention to detail applied to burning homes. Friedrich did not accompany the trucks. His mission was destruction, not disposal. Other specialists handled the final phase of the operation, the transformation of living people into statistical abstractions. Friedrich never learned the exact number of civilians killed that day, never read the reports that reduced human beings to lines in ledgers. But he knew. Every commander knew. The silence of the trucks returning empty told them everything they needed to understand about the fate of people who had packed their possessions so carefully, who had trusted German promises, who had believed that evacuation meant survival rather than death. "This is my last confession," Friedrich wrote as midnight approached, as candles burned down to stubs in the farmhouse where he would spend his final hours. "I write it not for absolution but for testimony. Someone must remember what happened in Malinovo. Someone must know that 400 people died not because they were guilty of anything except existing in the path of German ambition." Over the following months, Friedrich's company burned 47 more villages. The process became routine. Dawn approach, civilian roundup, systematic search, controlled burning, evening departure. Friedrich perfected his technique, learned to burn buildings efficiently while preserving anything useful for German forces. He became expert at destruction, could estimate how long different materials would take to burn, which structures would collapse first, how to use wind patterns to spread fire faster. His superiors noted his thoroughness, his attention to detail, his success at leaving nothing that could shelter enemies of the Reich. But expertise in destruction came with a price. Every village Friedrich burned took something from him, not guilt, which he had learned to suppress, but humanity itself. The capacity for empathy, for connection, for seeing other people as anything more than obstacles to be removed or resources to be exploited. The taste never left. Friedrich confessed in words that seemed to have been carved from his soul. "Ash on my tongue, in my throat, coating my teeth. I scrubbed until my gums bled but couldn't wash it away. I ate honey, drank wine, chewed mint leaves from abandoned gardens. Nothing worked. The taste of burning lives had become part of me. Support this work so the truth continues to reach people." Friedrich began writing his confession on October 13, 1943, exactly 1 year after burning Malinovo. He had requested leave, claimed illness, retreated to a farmhouse his unit had commandeered near the Polish border. His men thought he was resting. His superiors believed he was recovering from combat stress. In reality, Friedrich was dying. Not from disease or enemy action, but from the accumulated weight of 48 burned villages, 19,000 destroyed homes, countless thousands of murdered civilians whose names he had never learned but whose deaths he had orchestrated with German precision. The confession began as an attempt to explain his crimes to himself. How had a carpenter's son who built wooden churches become a destroyer of homes? When had following orders become more important than preserving life? Why had he chosen obedience over conscience, efficiency over humanity, military success over moral survival? But explanation proved impossible. There was no logic that could justify burning villages, no ideology that could excuse mass murder, no orders that could absolve individual responsibility for choosing evil. Friedrich had burned homes because he could, killed civilians because it was easier than refusing, committed war crimes because the alternative thinking for himself required courage he did not possess. "I was a coward," Friedrich wrote in the most devastating line of his confession. Not because I was afraid to die, but because I was afraid to live with the consequences of doing right. Easier to burn villages than to face court-martial. Easier to follow orders than to explain to my parents why their son had become a war criminal. The confession consumed Friedrich completely. He wrote for 12 hours straight, filling pages with details about villages burned, methods used, orders received, civilians killed. He described the smell of burning thatch, the sound of children crying, the sight of old men loading possessions onto trucks that would carry them to their deaths. He wrote about specific moments that haunted him. The teacher in Malinovo who had asked if she could save her books, the blacksmith who had offered to repair German equipment in exchange for sparing his forge, the priest who had blessed German soldiers even as they prepared to burn his church. Each memory was a knife twisted in Friedrich's conscience. Each detail another weight added to guilt that had become unbearable. By dawn on October 15th, Friedrich had written everything, confessed every crime, acknowledged every choice, accepted full responsibility for transforming himself from builder into destroyer. I cannot live with what I have done, Friedrich concluded, setting down his pen for the final time. Cannot continue breathing air that tastes of ash, sleeping in beds that smell of smoke, looking in mirrors that reflect the face of a mass murderer. This is my justice, not punishment from courts that will never try me, but acknowledgement that some crimes make life unbearable. Friedrich sealed the confession in an envelope addressed to no one. He cleaned his pistol methodically, checking every part with the same attention to detail that had made him efficient at burning villages. He wrote a brief note to his commanding officer, requesting that his family be told he died bravely in combat. Then Friedrich put the pistol to his temple and pulled the trigger at 6:17 hours on October 15, 1943. The shot echoed across the Polish countryside, joining thousands of other final sounds in a war that consumed everything it touched. Corporal Hans Müller found Friedrich's body during morning inspection. Müller read the confession, understood its implications, faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Follow regulations and submit the document for official review, or preserve the memory of villages that existed now only in a dead officer's words. Müller chose memory over regulations. He hid the confession in the farmhouse wall, behind loose stones that could conceal secrets better than official files. For 52 years, the confession remained hidden while wars ended, governments changed, and the truth about places like Malinovo slowly emerged from archives and survivor testimony. The confession was discovered in 1995 by Dr. Elena Kowalski, a Polish historian researching German occupation policies in Belarus. Dr. Kowalski was renovating the farmhouse, now a private residence, when she found the loose stones, the hidden cavity, the envelope that had waited half a century for someone brave enough to read its contents. Friedrich's confession fills a crucial gap in our understanding of scorched earth operations. Dr. Kowalski wrote in her groundbreaking analysis. It provides direct testimony from a perpetrator, showing how ordinary men became instruments of mass destruction, how military orders transformed moral individuals into war criminals. The confession was authenticated through handwriting analysis, cross-referenced with military records, verified against survivor accounts from villages Friedrich had destroyed. Every detail checked out. Every village existed. Every date matched operational reports filed by German commanders who had reduced mass murder to statistical summaries. Friedrich's family was contacted and informed about his confession. His nephew, Klaus Weber, was a retired teacher living in Munich. Klaus had grown up hearing stories about Uncle Friedrich, the brave officer who died fighting Bolsheviks, whose sacrifice had helped defend the fatherland from communist invasion. The truth was harder than the lie, Klaus told Dr. Kowalski during their only meeting. But lies honor no one. Friedrich's confession does not make him a hero, but it makes him human. It shows that he knew what he was doing was wrong, that he died from shame rather than enemy bullets. That matters, somehow. The confession was published in the Journal of Holocaust and Genocide Studies in 1996, causing immediate controversy. Some historians questioned whether any German officer would have written such a detailed self-incrimination. Others argued that the confession's psychological authenticity proved its historical value. Veterans groups condemned the publication as an attack on military honor, claiming that wartime actions should be judged by wartime standards. Holocaust survivors and their descendants praised it as crucial evidence of systematic atrocities, proof that perpetrators understood the criminality of their actions. Friedrich's confession forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about moral responsibility, military obedience, and the transformation of ordinary people into instruments of mass destruction. How many other officers burned villages while knowing it was wrong? How many followed criminal orders while maintaining secret doubt? How many died carrying similar confessions to graves that kept their secrets forever? The villages Friedrich burned were never rebuilt. Where Malinovo once stood, forests have reclaimed fields where children played and mothers hung laundry. Wild flowers grow where houses burned, their roots drawing nutrients from soil enriched by ash and sorrow. But memory persists where buildings have disappeared. Local historians have mapped the locations of destroyed villages, interviewed elderly survivors, preserved testimonies in regional archives. Friedrich's confession has become part of that preservation, evidence that the dead were not forgotten by everyone, that some perpetrators remembered their victims even when official history tried to erase both. The taste of ash that Friedrich could never wash from his tongue has become a metaphor for moral injury that persists long after physical wounds heal. Therapists working with veterans of recent conflicts recognize the symptoms Friedrich described: the inability to escape sensory memories of violence, the corruption of basic human experiences like eating and sleeping, the transformation of normal life into a reminder of crimes that can never be undone. Friedrich's story teaches us that war's casualties include not just its obvious victims but also its perpetrators, not just those who die but those who kill, not just the obviously innocent but the obviously guilty who discover that guilt can be a form of delayed death sentence. The farmhouse where Friedrich wrote his confession still stands, now owned by a family who know nothing of its history. Children play in rooms where a war criminal spent his final hours, their laughter echoing where Friedrich once wrote words that condemned himself more thoroughly than any court could have managed. Sometimes, the current owners report they smell smoke in the house, not from their fireplace, not from cooking, but something else. Something that seems to rise from the walls themselves, carrying the scent of burning wood and distant sorrow. The smell appears strongest in October, around the anniversary of Friedrich's death, as if the farmhouse itself remembers what happened in its rooms half a century ago. Subscribe so these forbidden stories never vanish again. Friedrich Weber's confession remains in the Federal Archive in Freiburg, File 8293-R, available to researchers who request access through official channels. The document has been translated into 6 languages, studied by historians and psychologists, referenced in dozens of books about Wehrmacht war crimes and the psychology of perpetrators. But the confession's most important audience was always Friedrich himself, writing by candlelight in a Polish farmhouse, trying to find words adequate to his shame. His final act was not the bullet to his temple but the courage to acknowledge what he had done, to preserve the memory of villages he had destroyed, to ensure that somewhere, someone would remember the names of places that existed only in the conscience of their destroyer. Friedrich's confession teaches us that recognizing evil is not the same as excusing it, that understanding perpetrators is not the same as forgiving them, that preserving difficult truths is more important than maintaining comfortable lies. His words remind us that every historical atrocity began with individual choices, that every mass crime was committed by people who could have chosen differently. Most importantly, Friedrich's confession preserves the memory of Malinovo and 47 other villages, keeps alive the names of places that official maps no longer mark, honors the dead by ensuring their destroyers never forgot what destruction actually cost. In the silence after Friedrich's final words, we can still smell the smoke of burning villages, still taste the ash of destroyed lives, still hear the echo of choices that transformed ordinary men into instruments of unforgivable evil. We can still ask ourselves the questions Friedrich died trying to answer. What would we have done in his place? How much of our humanity would we sacrifice to avoid military punishment? At what point does following orders become participation in mass murder? The taste of ash never left Friedrich's tongue because some moral injuries never heal, some memories never fade, some choices echo forever in the consciences of those who make them. His confession ensures that the taste of ash never leaves our collective memory either, that we continue to remember the price of obedience without conscience, efficiency without morality, military success without human cost. File 8293, R remains open in the Federal Archive. The case will never be closed. Some confessions demand permanent witness. Some voices speak loudest from beyond the grave. Some ashes continue burning long after the fires that created them have been extinguished. I set their houses on fire and felt the taste of ash on my lips. The taste is still there. It will always be there.